Today I'm going to read the opening of a brand new story, which is going to be incorporated in my collection called The Prison, which was published in 2017. Now, initially, it had 10 stories in total. I've since written two more, so that gives it a grand total now of 12. Given the fact that The Prison is inspired by James Joyce's Dubliners, I felt 12 would always be a nice round number. That's how many stories were originally in Dubliners, but because of the delay in getting it actually published, Joyce did add 3 further stories to his collection, making a grand total of 15. Maybe one day I might get up to 15, but 12 makes for a nice number. Now, the story I'm reading is going to be number 11 in the collection. It's the penultimate one. The other story that I've written is number 2, so they balance each other nicely in terms of the structure. One is dealing with childhood, and the one I'm going to read you is dealing with adulthood. Now, the title of this particular story is Signifying Nothing. If you've read your Shakespeare, you should get the reference, and I applaud you if you do. Congratulations. If you don't get the reference, then shame on you. You need to do more reading, especially when it comes to that wonderful play, Macbeth. Anyway, I'm not going to explain anything in terms of the symbolism or the meaning of this story. As I say, I'm just going to read you the opening of it, not the full story. On the ground floor, where the lucid ones dwell, you need to enter a simple numerical code for the lift. There are no revenants or lost souls here. It is only when you emerge on the top floor that you must be wary, for it is there that they tend to congregate, those perpetual wanderers, those frustrated prisoners, waiting patiently for the steel door to slide open. After Mother let me in, I sat down in the chair near the bed and noticed that she had written the first 4 digits of her telephone number inside the lining of one of her shoes. In case I forget and can't go home, she ventured by way of explanation. Towards the end, she often spoke of going home, though home for her meant Germany, not England. I took the portable mini-disc recorder out of its black leather case and placed it on her dressing table. With the cylindrical microphone jack plugged in, I switched it on, but she never paid it any attention. Even so, it felt as if I were doing something deceitful. As for her, she would simply have referred to the recording device as a machine, not knowing what its actual purpose was. To be a witness to her plight was one thing. To attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her mind was quite another, but worth the effort, I thought. The idea had occurred to me through a series of associations. The first of these came about purely by accident, as I clattered down the rickety cellar steps to read the electric meter. In this confined space that was governed by no semblance of order, it was perhaps wholly appropriate that a related thought should form whilst I was carefully picking my way through the miscellaneous rubble and piles of yellowed newspapers that were strewn haphazardly on the floor. For it was in another cellar, many years earlier, when I was still a child, that I recalled watching my father prizing off the lid of a tin of white gloss paint with a screwdriver, only to find that a leathery skin had formed on its surface. When he punctured the membrane, it made a popping sound, and I remembered just how strongly the oily liquid smelled as it seeped up through the hole. The memory that had risen into my conscious mind just like the paint oozing to the surface of the tin, was one that was associated with my grandmother's house in Germany. Unlike the cellar in my present property, it had narrow windows with horizontal white bars on the outside, and I recalled that I'd helped my father paint them, together with the front gate and the handrails on the balcony, during one of our long summer holidays. Throughout my childhood, the sunken world of that cellar never ceased to fascinate me. If you looked out of one of its windows, you would see, directly at eye level, clumps of curling ferns, the underside of their fronds coated with spores that were reminiscent of rusty blebs. Growing side by side with them were stalks of phlox, and beyond this curtain of vegetation, a cinder path took you past the pond towards the well with its cast iron pump handle. Every year on my return, I would yank the creaking green lever back and forth, as if one day fresh water might gush from the rusty spout. But it never did. Only stagnant, foul-smelling liquid filled the stone trough, which became a breeding ground for mosquito larvae throughout the summer months. Although our council flat had a wash house attached, which we shared with a tenant upstairs, and which my father also used as a workshop, this structural feature was as nothing compared with that cellar in Germany, with its laundry room, its heap of coal briquettes, smooth and ellipsoidal, and its bottles of wine lying side by side in the honeycomb of a wooden trellis. During the nights of terror bombing, my mother once told me that she often went down there via the wooden steps from the hallway, though it would always be safer to make the short journey to the air raid shelter on the railway embankment. Since her confinement in the residential home, that antechamber to oblivion, I'd made a point of gathering together all of her documents in a box file, and with thoughts of the German property uppermost in my mind, this led me to seek out the valuation report, the Gutachten, which was drawn up after my grandmother's death. It was in the middle of reading this document that I recalled how one day I'd sat with my grandmother on the steps near the front door, waiting for my mother to return from a shopping trip with my father. As a 10-year-old, I didn't know what was wrong with her, though it was clear that she was confused and emotionally agitated, she who was formerly so mentally alert. "Oma, was ist los mit dir?" I asked her repeatedly. But the words that came back, although they were strictly enunciated and obeyed the rules of grammar, were bereft of any meaning that I could discern. It was language shorn of semantic intention and without any logical coherence, where each successive sentence bore no relation to what had gone before. Fortunately, when my mother returned, she managed to pacify her. 2 years later, we received a letter enclosing a black-edged card that announced her death at the age of 79 years. Now that my own mother had succumbed to the same wretched state of affairs, I was determined to compile a sort of inventory, a final attempt to preserve at least some fragments of her memory before they disintegrated completely.